the Sky News Australia studios. This is The Outsider's Guide.
G'day, this is The Outsider's Guide to everything in the known universe. Topic by topic, we're solving society's biggest issues. So let's have a look at The Outsider's Guide to the gender wage gap. Rita Panahi, obviously you're paid way more than James and I put together, combined. So tell us all about the gender wage gap, so-called.
Well, this theory has been debunked so many times, fairly comprehensively, I might add, by people like Professor Christina Hoff-Sommers and others who've looked at the data and broken it down. And yet it keeps being repeated. It's almost accepted as gospel. We've had banks doing commercials based around the gender wage gap and how terrible it is. The fact is, if companies could get away with paying women 20% less, then they'd just hire women. Why would you not cut your wages by 20%? The gender wage gap, if you want to look at the data in Australia, it's around 17%. That's the figure they often quote. But if you drill down to the figures, if you take into account factors like experience, age, importantly, the industries you're talking about and the jobs that are actually being performed, the gap reduces to less than 5%. Now, people don't seem to, well, I shouldn't say people, feminists and people of the left don't seem to accept that women have a right to do the jobs they want to do. You can't force them to be electrical engineers. If they want to gravitate towards, say, teaching or nursing or something that's not as well paid, that is a choice they're making, and perhaps they don't value money as much as other factors or job satisfaction they might get. But that's not accepted. In the West, where women have got every opportunity, every freedom to make the choices they want to make, there's this pressure to push them into areas that perhaps they have no interest in, and engineering is one example. Of course, there's fantastic female engineers, and there's a drive to get more students, female students, to go to engineering, but why are we forcing them to do something they don't want to do? If they prefer to go and study literature, and that's their passion, let them do what they want to do.
Rita mentioned all the different pay gaps. Mumbrella, which is one of these lefty rags, has said that there is a 21.8%, a media kind of blog, sorry, a 21.8% gender pay gap in Australian broadcasting, and 80% of presenters are men, and that there's a lack of diversity, etc., etc. You know, this is clearly nonsense, but it is used all the time.
You know what? I think this is actually, I'm not saying that's nonsense, but I think the industries that are the wokest, whether you're talking about Hollywood, acting, entertainment, media, that's where some of this does actually exist. It is real. It's kind of strange that the industries populated by the most left-leaning people often are the most sexist or racial or exhibit behaviours that they condemn others for.
Yeah, and I think just to pick up on something Rita said before, though, isn't this whole gender pay gap dispute really just more sort of a symptomatic side battle about this broader sort of argument in society where, you know, you've got the progressive left, and they have for the longest time said that men and women, I mean, they say two things at the same time. They say, on the one hand, men and women have to be absolutely equal, and they have to do exactly the same things, and they have to get paid exactly the same. At the same time, they say if you're a little kid and you're a boy and you don't like to play with trucks, and maybe, you know, you're a girl and all of that. So they have this sort of two-way sort of street. But when it gets to the adult world and the world of economics, you know, it's a funny thing. They've got that Marxist materialist idea that the only thing that matters is your economic contribution. And so they suddenly, you know, when on one hand they're saying, you know, girls should play with girl things and boys should play with boy things, then as adults, if women want to do things that are different than men, that's a problem. And the only way that they're valued, the only way that they are considered to be fully women is, in fact, if they put their children in daycare and they go out into the workplace and they have the same hard-charging 60, 70-hour-a-week career as a man and get paid the exact same amount.
And, of course, don't have kids, because that's one of the reasons there is that small gap when you break down the figures. There's still 5%, is because women do give birth. And most women would like to take a little bit of time off, perhaps work part-time or just have some time away from from work to take care of their children. And that has economic consequences, but to just translate those or interpret those consequences as negative when so many women I know would prefer to stay home longer. They go back to work because of economic imperatives, not because they're desperate to be doing 9 to 5 again.
So back to our concept of the guide, you're at that dinner party and some woman starts talking about, oh, this is, gender pay gap's terrible. Or a man starts talking about it, the gender pay gap. The reality is that every individual in a free society should be free to choose what job they do and to negotiate with their employer about what is the best salary for them. As you alluded to earlier, Rita, if women really were quite happy to be paid less than men, then most employers would say, fine, have more women. Certainly, having run a company myself and having employed people, you're not sitting, do I want a man or a woman? You're looking for the very best person who will do that job for the very least amount of money. That's what employers do. That's how our economy runs. That's how capitalism works for the betterment of everybody. Now, the reality is that if someone's sitting in front of me and you're going to negotiate the best salary down that you can, and they're going to negotiate the best salary up that they can. The reality is, if you want the very best people working in all the jobs in your economy and you start imposing false constructs like, oh, well, gender pay, wage gap, or minimum wages, or penalty rates, all you do is get not the best person for the best job, and all you do is do people out of doing the job that they could otherwise do. And yet this, even with a coalition government, they have no concept of this.
But if someone brings this up as an argument, you don't even need to go through all that. You just state the fact that it's illegal. It's been illegal for a long time. You cannot discriminate against someone and pay them less according to their sex or race or sexuality or anything else. So if you've got Karen and Ken both applying for the same position, same grade, doing the same hours, you cannot legally pay one more than the other. There's legal obstruction to that, obviously. So this whole thing is...
yeah, but again, I would argue that's rubbish. I would argue it's rubbish because Ken and Karen might have completely different ideas about how the job be done, and they might negotiate different...
OK, you're talking about a small business. I'm talking about
a factory floor, sure.
So
well, that goes without saying.
Hiring 200 people to work in, say, a Telstra call centre, and they're all got the same grade, they're all doing the same hours, the same position, you cannot say, OK, we'll just pay the women 17%.
No, but what you can say, though, and I do think that, you know, it cuts to the heart of a lot of where the debate comes out of, but I do think that a lot of this debate comes out of a kind of a middle-class activist class that gets very annoyed that the choices that they've made for their lives don't pay as much as the choices that other people have made, and that they want to see a square up there. So, you know, you'll see, for example, in the industry of law, you'll see many women in law might decide that they don't want to go for the partnership track in a law firm because that is very big hours and all of that, and it takes them away from their family. And so they might take an in-house counsel role with a big corporation, which has more limited hours and also less money, still very well compensated, but there is that gap there. And they see that and they think, oh, why? Well, that's not fair. And so it becomes kind of a crisis of expectation.
And then they take that and say, OK, the in-house counsel isn't getting paid as much as the partner because those roles are typically performed by women, so they're paid less. It's the same argument that's made about why don't we pay childcare workers more? Oh, it's because they're mainly women, so we don't value them. No, women have got as much opportunity to go and study STEM topics as much as they want, or study teaching.
And in fact, university graduates, now the population of males to females on any university campus now, I think it's something like 55-45, you know, biased in favour of young women.
In theory, we should be seeing a gender wage gap in a few years flipped. We should be seeing that because more women are coming out of university.
No, you won't be. I'll tell you why.
Why?
Because more and more men are abandoning the university track to go and learn trades and do things like that, which actually pay an awful lot more money than your arts degrees, where you know you might have some sort of degree in grievance studies versus something where you're.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there are more women entering the law field, the field of law.
Yeah, absolutely.
Than ever before. Now, so we should see in that field, we're certainly we should be seeing a reversal of that, because surely if the best people are being paid the best and there's more women, then you should see a reversal of that.
Well, I don't necessarily expect that to happen, because women have outnumbered men at Australian universities since the 80s. This isn't a new
But what
phenomenon.
are they studying?
Well, that's it. It's what you're studying and the hours you work and the period you work. So if you actually look at how many years of full-time work and whether that full-time work is 38 hours or 50 hours, that all doesn't get factored in. That's very relevant data that you need to take into account. And as much as some would like this not to be a factor, but women give birth. Most women, not all women, but most women would like to have children.
Some men give birth too.
No, they don't. And then that also has an impact, and it doesn't matter.
Which means the reality is you're not comparing like for like, and that's the big furphy in this whole thing when they talk about a gender wage gap. They are not comparing A and B. They're comparing two very different lifestyle choices, very different long-term careers, very different skill sets, all sorts of things. They're trying to compare them out of a left-wing nirvana that somehow... And again, sorry, the key to this is this endless left-wing idea that someone is oppressing someone else. Mm-hmm. Therefore, men must be oppressing women. Therefore, this is just seen as wealthy, well-paid women in the elite in a city saying, oh, I'm a victim too, poor me, I'm a victim, I'm not paid quite as much as that guy.
That's what it is. It is women who are the most empowered women in the world, more empowered than we've ever been, trying to find some victimhood, because victimhood now equals virtue. What we want to have is equality of opportunity. You don't want to enforce equality of outcome, because when you do that, terrible things happen.
And that's it for Outsiders' Guide to the Gender Wage Gap. I think Rita's offered to give us a share.
Give us some of her money, yeah.
Let's equal
Pay up, Rita.
Fantastic. Outsiders.